Good morning, Somerset. I don't know if y'all remember me, but I came about a year ago while y'all were still looking for a pastor, and I'm so glad to be back. Thank you for allowing me to come today and to share from the Word. This morning we're going to be in Psalm 4. That's going to be on page 473 of your Pew Bible. But before we actually get into the psalm, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had a broken heart? Now, I'm not talking about the high school crush that went wrong. I'm talking about that feeling of pain that is deep inside of you. The feeling of loss, mourning, frustration, all of it together, that gut-wrenching, tear your heart out of your chest heartbreak. The only thing we can call it is a broken heart. I know I have. More than once. And many of us could probably say the same. But most recently, over the 4th of July weekend, Central Texas experienced this tragedy of flooding to our north. None of us could have expected it. And few of us had any way to respond. As news was coming out of Kerr County, we heard about Camp Mystic and the flooding there, and all of the girls missing from that camp in the path of the flooding. Mostly 7 to 10-year-olds. Young girls who had barely started to live. And I was left calling out to God, asking, why? Why have you done this? Why have you allowed this? And then one of my supporters gave me a call. Told me that some of her family were at that camp. They had twin girls, Rebecca and Hannah, who were missing. Then a few nights later on Sunday evening, she gave me a call and told me that their bodies had been found. And again, I turned to God. I said, why? I cried out, why? Brokenhearted. I was at a loss. I had no way to explain why God had allowed this flooding to happen, why God had allowed the loss of life that he did. And to be honest, I still don't know today. But God has brought me peace. I know that these girls that were lost, they're with him today. They are celebrating in heaven today. And I know that the adults that were lost, those that knew him, are with him. And I mourn those that didn't know him, for they're not. And I'm saddened by the loss of those. And again, I don't know why. But I do know that God's will, it wasn't broken here. God's will didn't fail in this moment. God's will occurred. You see, he brought us together in places like Somerset to pray, to give him praise, to give him glory, and also to cry out and lament, asking God why. Turning to him, recognizing that he is the source of our peace and of our joy and our restoration. Now, as we explore Psalm 4, we have to briefly look at Psalm 3, because these two psalms are written as what we call a couplet. They show us David's heartbreak, both in a time of tragedy and after that tragedy. Both of them are what we call lament. And that lament, it's quite literally calling out to God and saying, God, come fix this. I can't do it. Lament comes out of pain. It comes out of suffering. It's raw, and it can be poetic. Ron Allen, who's a professor at Dallas Seminary, and he's a theologian, he shares this: the Psalms of Lament are not just random screams in the night. They are real expressions of pain, of real people who exercise real faith in a real and living God. A couple weeks ago, Pastor Nick mentioned there's 5 different sections of the Psalms. The first section focuses on personal experience. This includes Psalms 1 through 41. So we're going to be right here at the beginning of this section. And personal testimony fills these passages. They reveal the persons of God and the psalmists very clearly. And we see not only the image of these persons, but we see their hearts, both God's heart and the heart of the psalmists. Before we jump into Psalm 4, I want to give you a brief review of Psalm 3, even though you haven't gotten to read it yet, but I want you to get the background. David wrote Psalms 3 and 4 after the rebellion of Absalom, found in 2 Samuel 15. Now, Absalom's his second son. And he rebelled because Abner, which is David's first son, raped Tamar, which is Absalom's sister and Abner's half-sister. Psalm 4 was written after Absalom's death. After the rebellion's been put down, David sits on the throne again. And he's heartbroken at the loss of Absalom, his second son, and Abner, his first son. He's heartbroken by the tragedy that his family has experienced. And he faces a court, a royal court, that does not believe that he should hold the throne of Israel. They look at him as a broken failure. Now we have a picture of his emotional state. Let's look at one more thing. As we briefly look at Psalm 3, it's on the page before Psalm 4 there. David wrote this one as he was fleeing from Absalom, who was coming for his throne. When you read it, you find lament pointing to conflict, to bloodshed, to David's enemies. He's crying out to God, saying, "Look at who comes against me. I need you." And we find confidence that the Lord will respond. He speaks with confidence that not only will he respond, but he'll restore David to the throne. Then we turn the page to Psalm 4. And we find his lament is a mourning after this conflict is past. He finds conflict in his court now because he looks at the people in his court and they don't look at him with respect. They don't look at him as one who can rule. Throughout this psalm, he focuses on 3 things. He starts with a focus on God's past glory. Then he moves, looking at the men in the court, and he finds man lacking. But then he focuses on God's promises. We're going to work through the psalm and see each of these. Let's go ahead and read with me. Again, Psalm 4. A night prayer, a psalm of David. Answer me when I call, God who vindicates me. You freed me from affliction. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. How long, exalted ones, will my honor be insulted? How long will you love what is worthless and pursue a lie? Know that the Lord has set apart the faithful for himself. The Lord will hear when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Reflect in your heart while in your bed and be silent. Offer sacrifices in righteousness and trust in the Lord. Many are asking, who can show us anything good? Let the light of your face shine on us, Lord. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and new wine abound. I will both lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, Lord, make me live in safety. When we think about that in light of the world we live in, it's kind of a kick. It kind of makes us think. Now, David opens this psalm with a bold call to God. We often hesitate to be so bold, to be so direct. In our prayer today, we step back and say, oh, God, could you maybe help me out? He doesn't do that. He says, answer me when I call. Straight up. He expects an answer from God without hesitation there. Now, when we hear somebody do that today, we kind of think, maybe you need to calm down a little bit. But Hebrews 4:16 actually talks of boldly coming before the throne of God. And many of the psalmists do this exact thing. They stand before the throne, they call out to God with expectation of hearing a response. It's not just, I'm going to send a message up to him. It's, I'm going to wait because you will respond. But it's not rude. It's not harsh. David actually couches his call with reverence. Listen to this. Answer me when I call, God who vindicates me. David is recognizing that God is the source of his vindication. Many translations say, God of my righteousness. David attributes God as the source of his restoration, as the source of his righteousness. He continues on with this next line. You freed me from affliction. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. See, David remembers that restoration. Only then, after he's given this to God, does he ask for God's grace and listening ear. Reading the Psalms can sometimes lead us to forget that these are songs of worship. These were the things that the early church actually sang. They reflect on Jesus' teaching of prayer. Think about Matthew 6. Jesus teaches us to pray in the same way that David is praying right here. Our Father in heaven, your name be honored as holy. Or as many of us learned it, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Did you hear that? Did you hear that bold call? The Father, followed by an offering of glory. Our Father, hallowed is your name. But David adds a personal edge. He doesn't just say our. He recognizes the blessings in his own life. He looks at God as the source of the good in his life. He sees that God restored him after his failure with Bathsheba and Uriah, his brother. After the brokenness of his family, God has lifted David as a man after his own heart. Even with all the mess in David's life, God still calls him a man after my own heart. He has forgiven him, forgotten all of his sin, and restored him to his place as king over Israel, king over his chosen people. God listens to him because David has placed his faith in God alone. David is focused on God's past glories, on the things that God has done in his life. Think about that. Think about the things God has done in your life. Think about how he has done for you. Even when you're having hard times, we can recognize the good that he has brought into our lives. And David's focus is unwavering. We can see it over and over in all of David's writings throughout all of the scriptures. Now, as we continue in Psalm 4, we see a shift. Charles Spurgeon calls this shift, or says, we are led from a closet of prayer to the field of conflict. You see, he shifts. How long, exalted ones, will my honor be insulted? How long will you love what is worthless and pursue a lie? Selah. When I first read this, I struggled to figure out, who are these exalted ones? Who is it that David's talking to here? So I had to actually pull out the Hebrew. which, guys, I rarely pull out the Hebrew. I had to pull out the Hebrew and figure out what did we translate exalted ones here? And it's two words here, bin ish. Now, y'all don't have to remember that. Don't worry about that. Just know that normally it's translated sons of man. And it's a term that is used for men who are worthy of honor, people who are lifted up, great men, worthy of respect. So David's actually looking at these men in his court who are respected men. And he's immediately painting them as fools. He's saying, great men, you are fools. Because he finds them to be lacking. Their foolishness is rooted in a love of things, a love of property, a love of success, a love of wealth. And he immediately creates a paradox between the foolish and the righteous. He calls us to meditate on this. When you read the word Selah, S-E-L-A-H, in Psalms, it's actually a call to pause, to reflect on what's been said before, and to just dwell on it, to meditate on those words, to think, what does this mean in my life and in the world around me? Consider where you lie on the continuum between righteous and foolish. Now, David finds that man is lacking. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. Without Jesus' covering grace, every one of us is a fool. Only through his election do any of us become righteous. And it's only in him that we find our righteousness. Only in him do we find righteousness. Have you ever heard the story of Amazing Grace? Where that song came from? John Newton. He was a slave trader. He was the captain of a slaving ship that would sail from Africa to the Caribbean and back. And in his later years, he was actually an investor in the slave trade. He made so much money trading people, taking people's voice away, and placing them into bondage. But later in his life, God got a hold of him. God called him out of that and helped him understand his sin, his brokenness. He actually became an Anglican priest. And he renounced all that he was. He was actually one of the leading abolitionists in England towards the end of their period of slavery. He and William Wilberforce were close friends working to stop slavery in Great Britain. And through the process that he went through, he found himself to be lacking. But in God, he found righteousness. He found restoration. He found amazing grace. Now, as we continue in verse 3, know that the Lord has set apart the faithful for himself. The Lord will hear when I call him. David shifts his focus away from the fools and to the righteous. He finds a focus on God's promises. He shows us that God sets us apart, and we step away from the group of fools, and instead we bear his mark of righteousness. Sorry. And God hears him when he calls. He hears the righteous when we call. And David teaches these sons of men there in his court and throughout all time. He teaches us to respond to God, and he will hear us. David's lesson continues Be angry and do not sin. Reflect in your heart while on your bed and be silent. Selah. Wow. I've heard the first half of this verse repeated over and over and over again throughout my life. I've heard so many angry people, hurtful people, who are so set in their ways and are willing to do anything to justify their show of anger, that they point to the scripture and say, see, it says be angry and do not sin. It tells me to be angry. But they never quote the second half. They never reflect in their heart while on their beds and be silent. It's really easy for us to be angry. It's not so easy for us to be silent. And it's so important that David actually calls us right there to pause. That Selah. He says, stop and think about this. Dwell in this moment and think about your anger. Think about how you respond when someone hurts you, when someone does something you don't like. Offer sacrifices in righteousness and trust in the Lord. See, here his lesson continues on that anger. When we face injustice, when we're angered, when someone's brokenness bumps into our own, we're to lay that at God's feet. Give him our prayers, our pain, and yes, our anger. And trust in his response. His response may be a call to act. Or it may be a call to trust him, to take care of it. But even in acting, it's a measured, even response, full of love, not anger. Consider how Jesus responded in the temple. Remember when he turned over the money changers' tables? What we often forget is before he ever set foot in that temple, he sat down and he braided a whip. He spent time in reflection while working with his hands to create the whip. And then when he went into the temple, he didn't hurt anybody. He simply cast out those who were sinning. He carried the cages of the birds out. He drove the animals out. That's what he used the whip for. It wasn't for the people, it was for the animals to drive them out of the temple. He didn't show rage. He showed a firm love, moving them from sin to right. Now take a moment to consider your own life. Are you good with anger? Or are you one who blows up, who shows your anger, who yells, who hurts others with your words and actions? When we feel anger, do we take it to God? Or do we take action ourselves? I know I mess up on this all the time, especially with my sons. I've got a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. Yeah, they're just getting to that really rebellious stage, just entering into it. And I get angry when I tell them to do something, and I tell them again, and I tell them again, and then I come back and I find that not only has it not been completed, it hasn't even been started. And they're off playing video games or whatever. I will get angry. I will yell. But since I've been reading this passage and spending time in this passage, I've been holding it back. See, God used this one specifically to remind me, no, Paul, you're not doing that right. And you know what? It's been helping out. They're doing the work better. They're actually completing the things I tell them to complete. They slip up every once in a while. We're still working at that. But because I'm lovingly correcting instead of just yelling at them, instead of punishing, I'm guiding. And our family is in better shape because of it. Even in as little as a week of changing how I'm doing it, we're seeing a difference. This is so important a concept that the Apostle Paul repeats it. In Ephesians 4, he tells us, it says, be angry and do not sin. Do not allow the devil a foothold in your life. See, he even goes further than saying, don't sin, be silent. He says, don't let the devil have a place to grab a hold of you. Seems like our best bet is to lay our anger at God's feet, doesn't it? To turn it over to him and let him handle that. To let him have the vengeance. See, this is a focus on God's promises. We trust him to do as he tells us, and he will. And that vengeance will be his. Now, David continues this focus in the remaining verses. Many are asking, who can show us anything good? Now, I hear this question asked a lot. I'm sure a lot of you do too. But the answers always seem to fall short. So many of our answers are rooted in leaders, political leaders, business leaders, that kind of stuff. In our culture, in our actions, in our words. Instead of going to God with this question, we decide for ourselves that we know what is good and what is evil. That's the very thing that Adam and Eve did to get cast out of Eden. They ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and decided for themselves what was right and what was wrong. See, we failed to dwell in his presence. And instead, we look to ourselves. But God has shown us good. Over and over, again and again, he shows us good. What David didn't know when he wrote this psalm was that God was going to show us the ultimate good in one of his descendants. His good was shown to us in Christ, who lived a perfect life, a sinless life, and was crucified. And up there on that cross, when he had every right to show anger towards all of us, what did he do? He cried out to the Father and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now we finish this psalm with David praising God. Let the light of your face shine on us, Lord. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and new wine abound. I will both lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, Lord, make me live safety. See, he points again to God as the source of his blessings. And he thanks God for them. He shows us that in God we find peace. David's heart, broken by sin, broken by failure, full of heartbreak, is restored. He is healed by the great physician, and regardless of the actions of others, he has grace. He has peace. Even as he feels grief at the loss of others, he feels joy in the presence of God. So lean into your faith. Or if you haven't already found him, place your faith in him and feel joy. Let's pray.